Does anyone else think it's kind of crazy that the last generation of console is still getting variations on new games that are coming out now? This means that games that are being made for the modern consoles today are being made with equipment that is over a decade old in mind. Like at this point, it's a bit of a meme that there are just no games that are for the PlayStation 5, not considering we're at the part of the lifespan of the console that we're at. But it's also like the chicken and the egg thing, you know? Do people not upgrade to the PlayStation 5 and the Series X because of the fact that there are no games, and therefore they have to keep making those games for their older consoles because people are not buying the new consoles? It just goes around in circles. A solution to this, and something that has not been done in a couple of generations now, is do what they did with the PlayStation 2 and the PlayStation 3 era, where if they were gonna do a game that was on both, it would be genuinely a different game. I think I saw a video where Jev said something like 40% of player base is still on the old generation of consoles. And at this point, aside from the fact that, you know, it'll lose the company's money, they just need to let it go. Initially, it was because getting a PlayStation 5 was hard. Like, you guys know that I'm the collector guy. I'm the guy that is obsessed with having things. And it took me a bit to get a PlayStation 5. Like, it wasn't a quick thing. But like these days, it's not hard to get yourself a PlayStation 5 in terms of like physically finding the stock. And in reality, a lot of people go, oh, but they can't afford it. But here's the thing. Games these days, if you were to buy like 5 games, that is like the price of a console now. And in reality, so few games that are worth paying full price for come out generally across a year that in the last 4 years, if somebody wanted to, they could have saved up for a PS5. They could have, if they wanted to. But clearly, they've just not been given enough motivation. There's no real reason to, because there's not that many games to get. Especially if they can play pretty much the same game with maybe a little bit less detail in textures, or potentially a little bit slower loading screens, on a console they already own, and have owned for a decade. It makes me miss like 2011, 2012, 13-ish, where it just seemed like so many games were coming out all the time, just all the time. These days, I feel like I can go like 6 months without buying anything new, and I'm the guy that gets games. And something else that I do wonder is what percentage of like the gaming market these days is owned by PC players. I think it's a lot larger than it was when I was younger. When I was younger, if you were a PC player, you were the hardcore. Like it was in like our heads, if you were a PC gamer, you were probably good at whatever game you were playing. There was no bad PC players, but now that's probably not the case. And because Xbox have effectively given up the console wars with Game Pass being on PC, and even now PlayStation 5 exclusives are starting to come to PC, it's really hard to justify for a lot of people, I'm sure, bothering with consoles when, let's be real here, I love me consoles, I'm a console guy, I've got a PC, but I don't use it for gaming, but it would be better to game on the PC, it just would. But like, even then, the games are being made with being able to be played on hardware that's a decade old in mind, even if you are playing them on PC. It's just pretty insane to me. I just think back to like when the PlayStation 3 came out and we would get games that were like tech demos for what the system's capable of. Like in the early days of the PlayStation 3, we got like Red Faction Guerrilla in the destruction physics and that. We don't get that much these days. In the early days of the Xbox 360, we had Dead Rising to try and show how many things could be on screen at once. That was cool. Hell, in the early days of the like PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, we had Assassin's Creed Unity. Came out very buggy, sure, but it still had a lot going on to try and be like a tech demo. For example, if you played the PS3 or the Xbox 360 version of Star Wars The Force Unleashed, you have not played this game. This is a different game. The dude even holds the lightsaber the right way round in this one. Now, the reason that they did this was because that way they could make the next gen, at the time, version of it without being concerned for whether or not the previous gen was capable of handling it. Now, these days, they would never do that because, guess what? Creating 2 entirely different games is probably going to cost even more money. And these days, money is the only thing that they ever care about. Like, at the end of the day, that's the problem, is that everything is a business thing and business will always come before anything else, always. And that's why we're at a point where like live service games and things like that are just so prevalent, even in single player games. It isn't just the online multiplayer games that are monetized through battle passes and cosmetics. We got single player games. Like apparently Hogwarts Legacy 2 is supposed to be a live service game because they didn't make enough money. And Dead Space 1 Remake isn't getting a sequel because Dead Space 1 Remake didn't sell well enough, even though everybody loved that game. The standards for how much money a game needs to make these days is too much. The thing that's inspired me to talk about this is seeing that apparently the next Call of Duty is still going to be out on the last generation of consoles. And what? Is the PlayStation 5 4 years into its life cycle this year? Something like that? That means that there's a real decent chance that we're well over halfway into this console generation, and it still feels like it hasn't really even gotten started yet. Like, I want to see something on these consoles that the previous gen absolutely could not even could conceive of doing. Is that the word I needed to use? I'm not sure. It's the one I'm using. It's the one we're going with. Also, if you guys haven't already, be sure to subscribe. But like, as an example, if you were to take a random person and put them in front of God of War from 2018 and God of War Ragnarok, a game from the end of the lifespan of PS4 and the beginning of the lifespan of PlayStation 5, I don't think unless that person's played them that they'd be able to tell you which one was which, just from random screenshots throughout the game, you know? And something else that I wish would happen more often is that when we were seeing examples of what hardware is capable of these days, I wish it was more than just being pretty. Show, rather than just look how much detail is in somebody's hair or how things move or physics or the rain or the water or reflections or whatever, or whether or not the fish move, who remembers the fish moving, I think more in-depth systems would be cool. An example of a game that did this really well is the dismembering mechanics that were updated for Dead Space Remake, where every necromorph has got like a different layers of like skin, bone, muscle that you have to get through. That is something that the PlayStation 3 era probably couldn't have done to that scale and also been that pretty, so it didn't. Like, rather than using all of this power to be as pretty as humanly possible, often at the detriment to being able to even withstand 60 frames a second, by the way, how about make games that are just cooler concepts that couldn't have been explored on weaker hardware? Because I'm sure there are some, like one that I have always wanted, and I don't think there is an example of a game that does what I want it to do here, is I'd love a game where the main thing is telekinesis. Your telekinesis powers, they evolve as you evolve them through the game. Maybe at the start you pick things up with the telekinesis and it be just like whole objects with no specific focus. You're picking up the object, but then as you level it up you can be more precise with it, where you pick something up by its arm. Say, think like VR Blade and Sorcery, where you can target different body parts, and then maybe as you get further in you can be even more specific with it, where you're targeting, like imagine being able to use telekinesis on like houses and things, so that you can create your own platforms and parkour your way around. And theoretically, if you had telekinesis you could even start flying, you could even use it to create fire. Why? See what I mean? This would require hardcore like physics stuff. That was a technical term there. Hardcore physics stuff. And I feel like it would be needed on powerful systems to do it. And it wouldn't even have to be that pretty, you know? Just it would be cool. I just always thought that was cool. I love a game with like really, really in-depth telekinesis. Like beyond just pick stuff up, throw stuff, like in, say, Control. Ironically, these days, the majority of like cool things that are being done in games is in indie games that don't have massive budgets, that aren't designed to be as pretty as humanly possible. And I just find it interesting that there's this race to be the prettiest game, and games are still being made backwards compatible with the last generation of games anyway, because surely if you were to just forego caring about PlayStation 4 generation, things would be much prettier because you could do stuff that hardware wasn't capable of doing, unless the gap is actually smaller than they think it is, which it might be. I don't know, I just think it's weird. I just think that this gaming generation has just not been very good yet. There's like 5 great games for the PlayStation 3 era, PlayStation 5 era, 4 years in, when every other console 4 years in had so many masterpieces. It's insane. Anyway, if you made it this far, like the video, comment down below your favourite game for the PlayStation 5, and subscribe. Bye bye.